You have a PhD in electronic engineering, is that correct?
That's correct. I've taught for the past several years.
No, that's fine, sir. Your credentials are already part of the record. Now, when you said earlier that Mr. Kearns didn't create anything new, could you explain what you meant by that?
Yes. As you can see, Dr. Kearns' basic unit consists of a capacitor, a variable resistor, and a transistor. Now, these are basic building blocks in electronics. You can find them in any catalog. All Mr. Kearns did was to arrange them in a new pattern, you might say. It's not the same thing as inventing something new, however.
Did Mr. Kearns invent the transistor?
No, sir, he did not.
Did Mr. Kearns invent the capacitor?
Again, no, he did not.
Did Mr. Kearns invent the variable resistor?
No, he did not.
Thank you, Professor.
You may step down, Professor Chapman. We'll resume testimony after lunch. Dr. Kearns, your cross-examination, please. Dr. Kearns.
Yes.
I have here a book. It's by Charles Dickens.
It's called A Tale of Two Cities. Have you ever read this book?
Objection, Your Honor. It's not relevant.
No, Your Honor, please, if I could just continue.
How long will it take to get to the point, Doctor?
Not very long at all.
Okay, let's see what happens.
Have you ever read this?
Yes. Read it in high school. Very good book.
Yes, it is. I'd like to read you the first few words. If I may, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. Let's start with the first word, it. Did Charles Dickens create that word?
No.
What about was?
Your Honor, is Mr. Kearns going to go through the whole dictionary?
Please, if I could just continue. I do have a point.
You may answer the question.
No.
The
No.
best
No.
times? Look, I got a dictionary here. I haven't checked, but I would guess that every word that's in this book can be found in this dictionary.
Well, I suspect that's probably true.
Okay, so then you agree that there's not probably a single new word in this book.
Well, I don't know, but it's probably true.
All Charles Dickens did was arrange them into a new pattern. Isn't that right?
Well, I admit I haven't thought about it in that way.
But Dickens did create something new, didn't he? By using words, the only tools that were available to him. Just as almost all inventors in history have had to use the tools that were available to them. Telephones, space satellites, all of these were made from parts that already existed, correct, Professor? Parts that you might buy out of a catalog.
Technically, that's true, yes. But
No further questions.
You may step down, Professor Chapman.
E.O. Wilson says this beautifully. He says the world from this point forward is going to be run by synthesizers. People that can take a lot of information from a lot of different places and make the right decisions at the right time and think critically about it. So it's no longer enough to be an expert in one field because the world doesn't know those boundaries. But we're being asked to draw from everything that we know and to synergize it in a way that we've never done before. So as the world changes in ways that we're not used to, faster than we've ever seen, our lives are changing as well. And we're all learning together. And this is where I think the synergy of the ancient and the indigenous wisdom, married with the best science of today, through community resilience is the key to bring us full circle.
When I began to understand that we live our lives based upon our beliefs, my question is, where do those beliefs come from? And what I found is that those beliefs come from what other people tell us. The beliefs come from what history tells us, what science tells us, what religion tells us, what our culture, what our family, our friends tell us. That's where our beliefs come from. Would you agree with that? So let me ask a question. What if they're wrong? What if they're wrong? What if you and I are living our lives in the beliefs of other people who are incorrect? What does that mean for us?
Another concept you introduce us to in here is the whole notion of priming. That is, that what kind of is put in our head can, again, structure our behavior, our output. Describe that in a little bit more detail and give us some examples.
Well, these are incredibly, they are spooky experiments that have been done in recent years, principally by a guy at New York University called John Barge. He gives you a test to do, and it's a series of words, and you have to take these sets of words and make sentences out of them. Really simple. What you don't realize, unless you're really, really, really smart, is that all these lists of words are on a similar theme. So suppose the theme of all these sentences is old age. So there's words like Florida, shuffleboard, arthritis, Then he measures how quickly you walk into the room when you come in to take the test, and he measures how quickly you walk out when you finish the test. And he finds that when you walk out, you walk substantially slower than when you walked in.
Because you've been thinking about arthritis and old age.
Yes, I have made your unconscious become obsessed with the subject of old age, and as a result, your unconscious has made you act old. Now I can do this he does the same experiment, and he does it with words having to do with being polite. And then he puts you in a social situation that measures your patience and how polite you are. And he finds, for example, he did this thing where he had the students take the test, go down the hall, and we want to give this to you. You have to give the test to some professor. But the professor is locked in conversation with someone else, and the question is, how long do you wait before you interrupt? If he primes you with words that have to do with polite, you'll wait forever. The kids were still waiting when they ended the experiment, like 10 minutes later. And if he primes you with words having to do with being rude, you'll interrupt immediately.
Now, some may think, well, these are frivolous little exercises, but the scariest one for me was the one you talk about where African Americans, one control group, was invited to state their race before they did an exam, and the other was not. The one that was primed to think of themselves as African Americans, as blacks, scored
much lower.
Way, way, way lower. Yeah. What is the implications of this for something as fundamental as education, for example?
Well, they're enormous. I mean, what they say is that, this goes to the theme of the book. If the theme of the book is there is more going on below the surface of consciousness than we tend to realize, what this says is, look, when you give someone a test, we like to pretend that what we're measuring is the kind of conscious contents of their brain. We're measuring something inherent, right, about how smart they are. We're not. What we are measuring, we're measuring some of that, but we are also powerfully measuring their state of mind at the moment they take the test. And to me, that completely undermines the notion, this naive notion that many educators have, that you can reduce someone's intelligence to a score on a test. You can't, right? Unless you are absolutely sure that you have ironed out and removed all those sources of bias, we have to accept the fact that a test is a deeply flawed instrument.
I said, go back to a time in your life. I know you had a friend. You were very close to your friend. You knew your friend's behavior very, very well. And you happen to know your friend's parent. And at one point you see your friend has some of the same behavior as their parent. So you volunteer something like, hey, Bill, you're just like your dad. And then you back away from Bill, who goes totally ballistic and says, how can you compare me to my dad? And most people are totally familiar with this. And I said, but this is a profound story. Everyone else can see that Bill behaves like his dad. The only one who doesn't see it is Bill. And there's a reason, scientifically. The conscious mind is thinking 95% of the time. And when it's thinking, by definition, it's not being mindful or paying attention. And as a result, the default shifts into the subconscious behavior. So now you're playing behavior that you don't see and comes from other people and sabotages ourselves, okay?
We all come up with our own interpretation based on our core belief system. Even Alexander in his book, what you read is a core Christianized version of his experiences. Had he been a Muslim, it might have been slightly different. Had he been Jewish, it might be slightly different again. And that's why it's so important not to get hung up on our dogma associated with a belief system that has originated from the construct, but to try and keep a totally open mind.
John Lilly once put it this way: there are no limits at all to the human mind whatsoever, except those we impose on ourselves because of our beliefs. And those limits are also beliefs to be transcended. And that's a view that suggests that the possibilities of human transformation are virtually infinite, that we have no way of knowing the outer horizon of what it means to be human.
Well, no, forget about belief, forget about faith. Okay?
How can you do that?
Belief is convincing yourself of something you have yet to know and understand through experience.
Because if you knew it, you wouldn't believe it, you'd know it.
Yeah, in belief, you're placing your life, your attitudes, and your trust in something which has not founded itself in truth within your being, which causes you to be vulnerable. In that state of vulnerability, you can be manipulated, accursed, damned, or can lose your life, all because of belief. You have to know what it is you wish to know. You can simply do that by asking for the understanding and listening to the feelings within you about that.
And so, of course, the first mode of defense is to simply say, like the Hopi Indian, man has a responsibility for the thoughts he chooses to entertain. In other words, whether that thought came from you or that thought came from somewhere else, why are you choosing to hold it in your mind's eye?
Absolutely.
Well,
okay,
there it is.
Now,
read it in the week. That's the fleet. And so you started training SEALs and special forces with these concepts so that they could use their belief systems as a tool rather than a driver. If you were a staunch Christian and two aliens walked in the door, the big question is, would you be able to see them? And now, with all of that said, belief systems are important to all of us, and, assumed truths. They're arbitrary, it turns out, and most people don't even know where they came from. They just assume they're correct. Jesus said it, I believe it, and that's that. But, with that said, I have a pair of bell-bottom pants I'm never going to fit in again. But I still keep them, like a belief system, as a reminder. They may not be appropriate for what I'm trying to do. And so you fold them up nice and neat, and you put them in the drawer to pull out later because they're familiar and comfortable with you, like old clothing is. And that's basically what I did. One of the power tools was to train SEALs how to change their belief systems like they would a pair of clothing. Now, in order to do that, you have to be able to witness your behavior. That's a different altered state, and why all the saints have throughout history told the public the importance of meditation and training the mind. That's basically, it's like an unruly little child. It runs all over the place. And, of course, the thoughts you choose to entertain are what happens. And so if you have a doubt, there it is. Merlin put it very succinctly when he said, anything not specifically forbidden is mandatory. That was in a little book by T.H. White. And that concept applies. Whatever is possible, you can count on it. So what you're trying to do is move through the course without ricocheting off walls or creating karma. You're trying to slide through things smoothly. How do you do that? It's called flowing. There is a technique that you can do that will allow you to touch some part of your inner being that has more knowledge than your conscious state does.
This is what the monks and the nuns teach in the monasteries. You remember the abbot said to us, he said, feeling is the prayer. Do you remember that earlier? Feeling is the prayer. The monks and the nuns, they spend 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours in a day in the monastery creating the experiences that give them the feeling, and the feeling is the prayer. We are conditioned to live our lives in our mind and discount our feelings when the truth is that our greatest experience, our greatest power comes from the feelings of our heart. So I wanted you to have just a little experience here this afternoon so that you know the kind of feeling in your heart that creates those effects.
There's also one thing when people are starting to experiment with these different techniques that we're all capable of doing. is that in the beginning, choose things that are easy. And when you get part of it right, or just a little bit, or you had that flashback and you're like, wow, I knew it was going to be that one. Why did I pick this? That's all part of the experience. And as you go through each step and you get those little successes, even if it was a glimpse of something, that's showing you that you're on the right track. And these are things that you can do in the most simplest of forms. And go easy, go slow. Don't expect yourself to like instantly get things like when you see that on the movies. It doesn't work like that. And with the knowingness, as you get the successes within yourself, something happens, because as it becomes more of a knowingness that you did get it right and you can do this, all of a sudden you'll feel it expanding even more, as the knowingness gives you more energy to actually focus on that you're practicing. It's kind of like a muscle that you'll exercise, as we explained before. It's the same concept. So always give yourself a lot of love when you're doing these things, because you're actually doing it. You're actually going out there and experimenting with all the abilities that is your birthright.
It's your DNA birthright,
Yeah.
your inherent gift from God's, to be the God-realized self here in the now, who hasn't given away their power, but sees their source self also, connected to the universe, connected to infinity.
Each conscious act means it has a limited duration. This has to do with memory. This has to do with the way you program your memory in your brain. Again, it has to do with the location of where that memory is in the brain. Most of this is going to be included in my new book, Extrasensory Perception. By the way, we have another new book that we've just come out. It's in the library for sale, called The Modern Alchemist. And Gene Houston has... in our next printing on it, will be on the back cover saying, the single most important book ever written on alchemy. Alchemy is a process. It is Path 25. It is the way of going from here to there. It is not the process. It isn't going from here to there. It is the process of how you go from here to there. There's some rules.
So the goal is less important than the process, the journey on which we go. That's where the magic is.
You're an observer like me, right? And many of the people probably listening are observers. And you see society and the individuals in society. And the nature of our reality as a human is that the majority of people are unwell, right? Unwell. We talk about obesity and all these sort of things, and heart disease, cancers and stuff like that. And, you know, for me, I'm a pattern recognition, and I absorb a lot of information, and to me there has to be a commonality to all that, right? Sure, some people might have like cancer, some people might get obese, some people might get dementia and Alzheimer's and stuff like that. There's some variance, right? But there's commonality. As we progress in age, there's an increased likelihood of having some catastrophic illness, right? That impacts our life and our ability to function. And to me, that's the commonality. So what I do is I sort of assess that, and then I go off and research what's the commonality sort of thing. And you know, the diet heart hypothesis, right, which is related to the consumption of cholesterol and saturated fat, is seen as it's been demonized, right? It's been, you know, Michael Tazarian talks about talismanic words, and there's a social association of emotion and words and language related to, say, cholesterol and saturated fat. And so we're sort of conditioned to believe that they're wrong. But what I've sort of done is I've gone back into history a bit, and this is where you were sort of leading into the indigenous societies and tribes, right? And there's this really amazing guy that was around about, he died in the 1940s during World War II. His name was Dr. Weston Price. And I find him an incredible being. I sort of equate him to like the Nikola Tesla of nutrition. Because Nikola Tesla was like, you know, the power that we operate our computers on and stuff was an invention of Nikola Tesla. And much of our reality today is based on his understanding. But yet this individual that created many inventions is not known. The difference with Weston Price was that because he was focused on nutrition, he could be buried under lots of data and information and stuff and lost the history of it. And what's happening is there's this resurgence of him. And what he was is he was a dentist. And he was a dentist out of Ohio, and I won't get into him too much, but basically he was looking for healthy people. And he was looking to the cause of the diseases and teeth issues in society, and he set up the American Dental Association, and he set up a very powerful group of individuals that led to, say, the Mayo Clinic and things like that. And he wrote like over 150 papers on health, like that are peer-reviewed and stuff like that. And then, you know, he sort of observed society back in the 1920s, and he said to himself, like, I don't find anyone anywhere that's healthy, any core group that I can use as a study group. So what he did was, even in his status and what he was, he decided to go out to the world and seek out groups that were healthy. And what he found was that in the 1930s, it was still an interesting time in human technology and stuff, right? There was a lot of untouched indigenous tribes around the world yet to be met by modern society. There were instances where there were outposts and the modern foods were able to get to them and stuff, but there were still remote, isolated areas where many indigenous people were yet to be touched by modern man. And what he found through, you know, going to over a decade during the 1930s, just between World War II and World War I, was that when he went to study these people and these indigenous tribes that were untouched, their level of health was far superior than anything he'd ever seen. You know, as a dentist, he was looking for causes of health, like gum disease and stuff like that, which he'd sort of assessed were the Trojan horse into further health issues later in life and in the generations that were to follow. And so he found these tribes that were in immaculate health. They didn't have dental health issues and stuff like that. Long story short, what he did was, for me, is that he went to all these different regions. Say he went to the Eskimos in the North Pole, and he went to many of the tribes in the Pacific region. He went to the Aboriginals, and he went to the African tribes in the like Central Africa before they were touched by modern man and stuff. He found that their nutritional intake was, it was unique. So the menu was unique, right? That the people chose to incorporate the nutrition via their foods, but there was commonality in the nutritional intake in all the elements that they were taking. So he taught me that there was pattern in what they were taking. And the wisdom of the indigenous people was that they recognized when to take certain foods for certain functions. Say, like a man and a woman become married and they're wanting to have children, the tribe would understand that the woman needs a certain food, and they would, offer and be in ceremony all the time and stuff like that. So it was fascinating, and so then World War II sort of happened, and a lot happened.
I was letting you go on. I've heard this. I've heard your book, and I've talked to you about it, and I wanted you to explain it all. The idea is that this is I think important when we go into the next idea of visualization and spiritual healing and all this other kind of stuff, finding knowledge, is these indigenous people didn't know the physics, the biological, biochemical reasons. It's a question of a long time of observation, taking notes, noting the results, and then repeating and modifying until you have a conscious knowledge of this is how we do it because we stay healthier. It doesn't have to know the mechanics behind it. So that when people nowadays visualize their own health or visualize happiness and walk along that path, notice things in their life that cause them problems or cause them joy, to bring those in their life or remove them out. This is the mechanism that we've lost. Now we have people writing computer models, and the models say this is the best thing to do, or these tests say this is the best thing to do, and you're ignoring the real-time data in your life and those for hundreds or thousands of years behind you. So it's kind of a rediscovery of observation over time equals knowledge, rather than, the technical slicing up and dicing up in a short-term thing. Not that that's not a bad tool to have, but and when you have money involved, then all bets are off. So anyway, we'll take a break there. So hold on. We'll be right back with Andre Hodge live from Australia as we plow through these old truths that are reemerging.
The next layer is even tougher than the first layer that I began to describe. You know, we're coming into a time where wisdom and knowledge is going to be spread very, very fast. And there's going to be these wildfires of wisdom and knowledge that take forward, and the forces of domination and control are going to try to come out with their water cannons and put out those fires. They're going to come out with their carpet bombing and whatever else the concept that they're going to come up with simply to stop the sharing of wisdom and knowledge. Because wisdom and knowledge is the battlefield. Wisdom is the battlefield. Because with wisdom, you can reject the illusion. With wisdom, you can understand the patterns in the illusion, and you won't fall to the bull hockey that they try to present us. You know, here you are, confronting and facing everything that's in this world right now. You know, it's not easy at times. You know, even me, someone that's been on this path for a long time, I am also confronted with situations that I must heal and overcome. It's just tough at times.
I want you to think about all of this, because this is really the crux of where you start. You start with the physical plane. The bottom line with, to build, in order to be spiritual, you have to have a platform from which to launch. It's critical. So in my book, these are the 8 chapters that I did. I do cordyceps and transfer factor, biofeedback and brainwave training, breath control and virtual audio. Each one of these is associated with the 8 basic worlds, and you start with one world and you tier it up in levels of the resolution. This is how you do it. These are the power tools that I developed for Navy SEALs that made us Supermen. These are things that you can do in your own personal life toward your own evolution of consciousness. And you start with one step at a time. It's like exaggerations or losing weight. You do it by 1/4 pound a day. You don't end it because it's a process. You never quite get there because the detail of the information is beyond where you are right now. And so what you're trying to do is a process towards something, not an end product, but towards something. That is the only way you're going to change the universe.
So the good news is that we already have all the solutions. For every major issue, all the big problems in our world, we have the solutions. And Bruce and I talk about this all the time. The greatest crisis, I think, that we're facing is a crisis in thinking that has yet to make room in our lives for the solutions that already exist in the world. We have enough food to feed every mouth of every human on this planet. Right now, there's no shortage. The food is not the problem. It's the politics and the thinking that won't allow it to get in the right places. We have forms of energy that produce no greenhouse gases, that are inexpensive, abundant, that could fuel every home of every human on the face of the earth that chooses to have power in their home. It's not the technology that's the problem.
Go back very quickly, and I'll just close it out because there's some interesting part about the story of the Matrix. It says, take the red pill and get out of the programming. And I would say, well, what would happen if you didn't go in, if you stopped operating from your programming, if you stayed mindful right now and stopped operating from the program? I'll tell you what happened, because you've experienced it already in your life. If you ever fell in love, head over heels in love with somebody, this was the one time in your life where you don't default to the subconscious programming. It's the beginning part of love. Is called the honeymoon. 3 things are very important about it. Number 1, you're extremely healthy. And the reason is love causes brain secretions in the culture medium that give health to the cells. People glow.
They have tremendous energy when they fall in love. I always joke that they make love for days without stopping for food or sleep. They got so much energy. And I also come to this most important conclusion. When you ask people who are in that state of what I call the honeymoon effect about life on this planet, to them at that moment it's heaven on earth. It's heaven on earth. And the fact was, well, that was not an accident or a coincidence. They created it from what? Conscious mind, wishes, desires, and aspirations. Then there's a tendency to lose it and it falls apart. And the reason is, well, why did it fall apart? And the answer is, when life gets busy, you start to think. And the moment you start thinking, you default to the programs that you got from your parents and your community. Well, those behaviors were never part of the honeymoon. So when they're introduced, usually it's a shock to the other person to see that behavior show up. And this is where that, I love the phrase, who are you, comes out to their partner. And the fact is, then you have to go back to Bill's story. Bill didn't see he was playing the behavior, so he has no idea he has that behavior. So when a couple start to argue over the behavior that shows up and one doesn't even know they played the behavior, that's where the thing starts falling apart and compromises start coming in. Well, I accept that crummy behavior because we had this great honeymoon part. That was really good. But then another compromise and another compromise. And every time you compromise, the honeymoon disappears quick, piece by piece by piece, until you say, no more compromises, relationship over. And then you stand there thinking, how did something so wonderful turn into this? And the answer was, it was wonderful when you operated from your creative, conscious mind and were mindful. And you lost it when the programs kicked in.
You know, like, say me, like in that development of grasping that concept, you know, I'd have fear, 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 an instance of love. Fear, 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 love, love, fear, fear, love, 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 fear, and then gradually, like, say the scales tip, and then you realize you go into the instance of fear, and you realize how toxic it is for you, and it's just like, oh, no, I'm over fear. And I remember you, Andrew, had that great interview with Rebecca Jernigan, which I've mentioned in the past, and she just goes, man, I'm just over fear. And I'm like that as well. It's like, I don't even, like this thing that's going on in Boston, I know what it is, but I just don't give it any energy at all. I know what it's about. It's like a waste of energy to even give it any focus, and it's like not going to even allow it to have any focus or any attention from me. So.
And you're right, and that's empowering you to find your state of love being, so that the wisdom that you are co-creating with that love state of being can take you to newer levels, so you can share new patterns and associations with those consciousness explorers that understand we live in an illusion. And the only way to overcome the illusion is to let it burn into ash of history. Simple as that.
Yeah,
you know, and history will record it as a time where we all came together and had enough state of being love to change it.
And I would say, like, I mean, we express love and blah, 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 right? But basically, you've got to be okay with absolutely everything. And to not allow it to affect you is actually love. And that's the hidden thing. It's so simple, but we feel we need to, like, say, for me, being a heterosexual guy, I see an attractive girl and it's like, oh, that's love, but that's not what it is. That's the infatuation. And Anthony DeMello describes it beautifully. He says, you know, a tree does not give its shade to good people or bad, right? It gives it to all equally. And a light in the street at night does not give its light to good or bad. It gives it to everyone equally. And even the tree, right? He describes in a really beautiful quote that even if you're a lumberjack about to cut it down, the tree will even make your axe smell beautiful with the sap. You know, it will still love you on that level. It's unconditional. You know, so
exactly. Unconditional. Yeah. Those strings are covert motors attached to it, and too much of sexual love concepts has covert motives or strings attached to it, and people learn that habit pattern and take it into the family structure and beyond, and that's what ultimately breaks down the being of love.
And my great lesson in relationships, which had caused me harm, was I didn't love myself unconditionally, and I was drawn to people that didn't love themselves because I wanted to fill that void. And if you don't love yourself, There's no external love that will fill that void. It's up to us individually to love ourselves unconditionally, and then relationships will be great, because love isn't practiced in our word. It's all fear, right?
You're right.
I actually have something to contribute about judgment as well.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very physically sensitive, so I actually know when I have a subtle change in my energy, because I would actually like to put out this. I know the very subtle difference between judging and observing. I guess you could probably say it's discernment, but I use discernment against information and teachers rather than individuals that come in my life. I guess everyone's a teacher, but judgment. When you judge someone or someone judges you, they're seeing a mirror of themselves, and that potentially they're seeing the invalid in themselves. And I know when I go into judgment, it's like, oh, there's something I've got to learn here about myself. Someone triggers something in me, and it's something I've got to work on in myself. But I think, like you say, the sacred natural point of view, I call that just the observer mode, where I just, if you're, like you're saying, you're exhausted earlier on, if you're weak energetically, you can go down to judgment, because you just think, oh, this guy's a drongo or whatever. But when you have the energy, you can stay in that observer mode and you can appreciate it. Because, I mean, you guys would know when people are making moves in their lives and they're going to probably cause themselves suffering. And you would like to prevent that, being a compassionate individual. But you know that perhaps that individual needs to learn a hard lesson to really ground that knowledge in their being, right? So when you're an observer, you can just appreciate the purpose of everything. And I do my best to just stay that way with everyone. And it can be a challenge with spiritual people, right? Because they can bring their game or they cannot. And it's just, I think in this time, right, everyone, I mean, it was mentioned in the chat that there seems to be a lot going on, and I feel that a lot of the unresolved traumas and issues in individuals are being drawn to the surface. And if you go into judgment, then you can really suffer in yourself. And if you stay an observer and not bite the hook, you can just weather the storm. So.
Yeah, that's right, weather the storm. And when the storm is over is when we'll realize we're the observers. And when you're out there on the ocean waves of time, quite literally, because you're right on the edge of having to accept that the world we're living in is as transmutable and mutable as we want. It's just a matter of our conviction to follow through. And that conviction requires determination and discernment. And when people don't bring their A game or haven't been doing the hard work and allow ego to be the autopilot, it leads to those self-destructive moments, and then people get caught in those moments over and over and over again until finally they must go through an awakening process. And much of the awakening process people are going through now is because the energies of waves that are coming out of the sun are getting more and more and more and more intense. And the children are waking up fast, the adults are waking up. We're going to reach this tipping point. And this tipping point is where people convert rage and anger and frustration and everything that's wrong with this world to an action plan. And that action plan is what the event will unfold itself. That's when we all put our concept into the fires of creation and say, we are affecting change. And this is what many of the truthers are going to be experiencing. I know both Diane and Andre, too, at some point will have to look at that question, what is enough?
When is it enough? Well, I will say one thing for sure. I'm glad that I brought up about discernment and judgment, because I think again, it's the frailty of words and of definitions and so on, but all of this does need to be discussed. The one thing that we all do need to remind ourselves of continually from here on is that we people have more in common than not in common, no matter who we are. And we just, I think, probably need to keep reminding ourselves of that every day.
All right, everybody, I'm going to start with the stream read today. And the stream of the energies that's coming is about understanding your internal intent. Your internal intent is what determines your heart space. It's what determines what is coming out of you. There are times that people don't look at their internal intent, and they simply allow consumerism or materialism or tangible subjects to help create compass settings and directions of where they're going. This is it. This is your time where you can go inside and determine what you want to create and what you want to co-create with. This is your chance to understand what you're going through in your personal rites of passage, where you are on the sacred path, where you are as part of this world. It takes an inner understanding and knowing of the prayers within inside. These prayers are wonderful situations for you to express to you and to the universe, or to whatever vehicle of spirituality you have. Each vehicle of spirituality needs time to evolve inside. And once it begins to evolve, you're able to understand that your layers of prayers create boundaries, and these boundaries help you expand and explore what's inside. These boundaries also at times get limiting, and there are times you must let go of certain boundaries so you can transmute your power. And when I say transmute, is like the old alchemy sense, turning one into another, turning fear into love, hate into tolerance, so on and so forth. Until we come to that understanding, we must build our own bridge out of ignorance and intolerance and into wisdom and knowing. Wisdom and knowing comes through action. Action turns knowledge into wisdom, and wisdom is about understanding your dreams, the dreams of the inner child, the dreams of the person inside, the adult, and even though the old person that you aren't yet. How does one observe and not influence?
That again would be going back, as previously discussed, in a neutral point of view. And that's hard to describe, really, but once you start experiencing being in the center and not out in the perimeters of a vortex, but being in that neutral space, that is when true discernment would be made.
Right, when we let go of polarity.
Correct.
Polarity leads to the very edges of it, where you are completely opposite of your soul purpose and your soul mission. And when you're in polarity, you're in that flux of positive, negative over and over again until finally you create a pattern that is only positive, negative, and no neutral. And when you're no longer neutral, you can no longer observe neutrally. You have to re-enter that state and allow life to flow by you. And as life flows by you in the polarities, you step forward in the neutral each time, creating the bottom part of the sine wave that is the forward motion of your energy of life. When I was asking Andre about that, that was a forward momentum and energy in his life, and that was a soul contracted moment, actually. Soul contract to be with that group and what he shares on whatever level he chooses to share. And when you become understanding that soul contracts are always in play, we get to one of the reasons that this show I'm doing. You know, I'm soul contracted to give out as much information as I can, but it's the people's involvement and investment that brings the new layers out, the new potentials out, so we reach audiences on a grander scale. When I ask people like Diane or Andre to come on the show, it's because the show goes through its ups, its downs, its intermediates. It also goes through a time where the people that are listening have begun to hear the message and have begun to apply the tales, and those regular listeners need times where people can feedback much of what we're hearing on this show or any other shows, where it brings a deeper state of reflection on what the message is, which is empowering yourself. Empower yourself to heal yourself. Empower yourself to heal others. And then moving from healing is creating knowledge and wisdom and sharing it so each person has something to look forward to that's separate of this 3D world, where we can create and co-create together, and then eventually create and co-create in dream time. Each time taking the new step of energy, the new layer of discernment, the new layer of the neutral observer, so ultimately you can raise your vibration to meet your soul contracts, the highest forms of them. Because the contracts that are below you are the contracts of the fine print in the ego. And you can easily eliminate those all by being the neutral observer and then consciously saying, I end all contracts with fine print that do not promote my forward momentum of energy. When you reach that level that you can do that in a state of silence, you are literally changing your course of the future and returning your free will to you. Literally.
That's interesting you say it in that way, because I was thinking of that over the weekend in exactly the same fashion as what you were talking about right now. The fine print of the contract.
Mm-hmm. We can say no to it at any time. And saying no and removing its power is the greatest weapon that every one of us have.
Well, you seem to be, if one carries your position to its logical extreme, it means being willing to look at the grossest, most hellish misery on the planet.
All of it.
And embrace it.
All of it. All of it. You look just directly at, you learn how to keep your heart open in hell. Mm-hmm. You see the horrible beauty of the universe. I remember once I was teaching down at Big Sur at Esalen, and they gave me a house to house sit, and it came with a cat, and the cat and I became buddies, and every day the cat would come in when I was meditating in the morning and bring in its morning breakfast, which was a lizard or something, which was usually still alive, and it would sit down between my legs to eat, to be with me. And I would be sitting there being with God, and I'd hear squeak, squeak, crunch, crunch, and I didn't know who to hate. I mean, I loved the cat, but suddenly the cat was a killer. And I loved the lizard because I identified with the, you know, and I went through all the changes, and I saw it is the phenomena of nature. You've got to be able to look at it all and say, yes, I acknowledge it, without being so busy reacting to it that you don't, because you don't even understand why it is that way. I mean, my ability to see around the edge of the, as Rilke said, the billboard at the edge of town, being able to see just around the edge of the veil, and I can just see a teeny little bit, just like we all can, leads me to understand the game is much farther out than I thought it was. That suffering has, I mean, I can understand the term suffering is grace. I can't live it. I can live it at moments with little suffering. But I can understand that there is a beautiful unfolding of awareness through suffering. That's what my work with the dying is about.
Spirituality means waking up. Most people, even though they don't know it, are asleep. They're born asleep, they live asleep, they marry in their sleep, they breed children in their sleep, and they die in their sleep without ever waking up. They never understand the loveliness and the beauty of this thing that we call human existence. You know, all mystics, Catholic, Christian, non-Christian, they're all unanimous, no matter what their theology, no matter what their religion, they're all unanimous on one thing. And that one thing is, all is well. All is well. Everything's in a mess. And all is well. Strange paradox. But tragically, most people never get to see that. They never get to see that all is well because they're asleep. They're in a nightmare. You know, talking about sleeping reminds me, last year on Spanish television, I saw a nice little story. There's this elderly gentleman who knocks at the door of his son, who's fast asleep. He says, "Jaime, wake up." And Jaime says, "I don't want to get up, Papa." And the old man says, "Get up, you've got to go to school." And Jaime says, "I don't want to go to school." "Why not?" says the old man. "Because first, it's so dull. Second, the kids all tease me. And third, I hate school. So the old man says, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why you must go to school. First, because it is your duty. Second, because you're 45 years old. And third, because you're the headmaster. Gotta go to school. So, wake up! Wake up! You're grown up. You're too big to be asleep. Wake up. Stop playing with your toys. Most people tell you that they want to get out of kindergarten, but don't believe them. Don't believe them. All they want for you to do is to mend their broken toys. Give me back my wife. Give me back my job. Give me back my money. Give me back my reputation, my success. This is what they want. They want their toys repaired. That's all. Now, even the best psychologists will tell you that. They'll tell you people don't really want to be cured. What they want is relief. A cure is painful. Waking up is unpleasant, you know. You're nice and comfortable in bed, and at least as long as you're asleep, it's irritating to be woken up. That's the reason why I told you the wise guru will not attempt to wake people up. I hope I'm going to be wise these days and make no attempt whatsoever to wake you up if you're asleep. None of my business. My business is to do my thing, to dance my dance. If you profit from it, fine. If you don't, too bad. As the Arabs say, the nature of the rain is the same, but it grows thorns in the marshes and flowers in the garden.